Hey everybody, welcome to the Sustainability in Motion podcast, brought to you by ED4S. We focus on the fast-moving sustainability world to help the business community better understand the sustainability and environmental challenges we all face. I'm Matt Orsog, Chief Content Officer at ED4S.
And I'm Nawar Al-Saadi, a founder and CEO at Canada Advisors and Chief Advisor to ED4S.
We have as our guest today, Victoria Hurth. Victoria is a fellow at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. She's an academic and practitioner who speaks, writes, and works with companies to help them build a more sustainable world. She's a recognized authority in clarifying a sustainable market economy and how to align organizational decisions with it. Victoria, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Matt. Can I just say briefly, my headline title is Independent Pracademic, because that's what I am, of which I have a portfolio of a whole range of things, of which one of those things is fellow of CISL. And the reason I say that is because I've got a contract with them because of the King's involvement. It's quite specific, but also because, it's not my headline. It's one of my sub things.
That's fine. And Pracademic, I had to look this up when I saw your bio. He's someone who's a practitioner and an academic. I just hadn't seen that term before, so I'm sure that's new to some people as well. Well, we're thrilled to have you. The topic we want to discuss today is one that Nawar and I know very well, but we thought our audience might not, and we thought it would be a great introduction to them, is the idea of a well-being economy, what that is and what it really means. So let's start straight off. What is a well-being economy? Beyond the official definition, what would it look like for companies and financial institutions to exist in a well-being economy?
Okay, so that's a bit like taking a thread and pulling it. And
Yes.
Whilst I could jump into that, what I really need to do is give some framing, because it's not possible to understand the well-being economy and its role without stepping back. An economy is a tool by which we take resources and transform them for the well-being of society as a whole. That's economics 101. It's not controversial. It's just sometimes skirted over. But ultimately, that's what it's there for. It's a tool of society via government. Citizens are the ultimate governing body. We delegate to government to govern on our behalf. And one of the major ways that the government can deliver the collective long-term well-being that we delegate to them, that's what we want them to do, is through the economy, because the economy takes those resources and transforms them for that. So, and over time, that economy is taking up a bigger and bigger role in our lives in terms of being able to provide our well-being. There's a reason for that. I realize in this short podcast, we're not going to get a chance to go into all the details, so I will try and keep it at a speedy and big enough level.
Well, that's a great way to frame. That's a great way to frame it. So thank you for doing that.
Okay, thanks. And there's a lot behind all of that. So
yeah, of course.
They're big claims. But one of the issues we have is that we're not seeing the forest for the trees. In other words, we are focusing on differences, as we often do, and we're focusing on, but we're not, there are big things that are just sitting there as obvious truths, you might say, or wisdom that has just gone unnoticed. And that's one of them. Another one is understanding that the goal of the economy, long-term well-being for all, is actually the definition of sustainability, if we take the Brundtland report. And so really, if the economy had been doing what it should have been, we wouldn't even need a word called sustainability, because we have this economy that's supercharged in size and speed. And yet what we have through that economy is the undermining of long-term well-being for all, literally the opposite of the goal of the economy that we think it's doing, right? Okay, so that already tells us, oh my gosh, okay, so the economy is not the problem. That's purpose-driven. That's there to serve the good of everybody over time, which is also, like I say, definition of sustainability. But also, if you're going to ask enough whys, why is something good versus not good? That's where you'll end up. It's the closest we might get to humanity's meta purpose, right? But if the economy is therefore delivering the opposite of that, and all the data is telling us that's the case, unless you're minded to ignore the data and destroy the data because it's too confronting to that reality, if we stare that in the face, we can see that that's the reality, right? So that then helps us to see that what we have is an unsustainable economy. Now, that's nothing new. We know that that's the case. What has been missing so far is a sense of precisely in what way that is the case, what's holding that in place, and why after 30 years of knowing this, are all the key markers still going in the wrong direction? And we have to understand that in order to understand what the well-being economy is and how it fits into the solution. So if this is a good moment, I will break down perhaps those three logics. Okay. So the economy is a man-made, human-made social construct, like we've just said. Yeah. So we know we want to transform. We want a system that will systematically make decisions so that resources are transformed for well-being. And we have the economy. It has been made and unmade and reconceptualized over the thousands, hundreds of years, especially the specific market economy, because that's what we're talking about here. And we've had variations of command and control. But in the last since the mid-1850s, and very specifically supercharged by Friedman, we have a very particular way of organizing this market economy. And we have written it into so many layers of our governance and thinking and business schools that it gets to the point that we have forgotten that we live in this very deliberate system. This is not a system that is just natural. It is constructed. So we have designed the system very deliberately. And since that sort of Friedman doctrine, and it's very easy to say, there are all different sorts of the economy that exist. But the reality is, in that post-war period, supercharged in the 1970s, we embedded very specific assumptions about how best to organize the economy so that we optimized well-being for the collective. That was the goal. And these were assumptions about how to do it. We then said, yep, these work. And we became so convinced of that, we stopped governing or didn't govern whether the outcomes that we assumed would be the case were the case. So we, in effect, created this, we could call it a well-being machine. As like a black box based on these set of assumptions that if everyone plays their little part of this machine, then the machine will automatically optimize. And we're so convinced we don't govern the outcomes, but we don't question whether those assumptions are working. Now, we know that those assumptions, every single one of them, have been unpicked. And yet we feel so disabled from being able to focus in and call out the problem with the system, which, as I just said, if you lay it out, it's pretty obvious that the problem is not the economy, it's the way we're organizing it. And the choice is really between redesigning that market economy or command and control. So this idea of left and right, I think we just need to move way beyond or way underneath, you might say, to say, look, how many people who say we get rid of capitalism really want to get rid of, let's call the roots of capitalism, which are really about a market economy? Who wants to get rid of those freedom, democratizing, and efficiency effects? Very, very few want to move to a system of command and control, we're probably aided by AI and a few people telling us what to do. No one really wants that. The problem that we've had is that those who are standing up for this logic one, business as usual, which hinges on the assumptions of short-term self-interest, and particularly a very fundamental toxic assumption that financial income is a brilliant proxy for well-being outcomes. So that's the assumption of all assumptions. And so those that really truly believe and mostly benefit from that system, or believe that they benefit from that system, have a very clear way of trying to anchor that to the idea of freedom and democracy and efficiency. And anyone else who isn't there is stuck with essentially being tied to communism, which in America is tied to socialism, which it isn't in the UK and Europe, and by proxy, command and control. And we have to get out of that dichotomy. To do that, we have to be able to name that the problem is the way that we've conceived of this freedom and this democracy and these efficiency effects. So logic one, the idea that I'm an individual, I'm a citizen, I am therefore rational, and I know my well-being. I know what's best for me. No one can tell me what that is, but I'm very good at understanding that. So therefore, as long as there are certain conditions met in terms of competitiveness within a marketplace, of self-interested companies who are trying to make as much money as possible and are looking to compete, which is a counterbalance to self-interest, because you're only going to win if you do better than the other party at meeting not the well-being of citizens and people as a whole and customers, but revealed preferences. So it's not for the company or anyone else to say, what is well-being? What is in your best interest? Because if we're assuming their self-interest, that could be interested, that could lead to manipulation. So we keep that distance and that arm's length. And we say, as long as you are serving revealed preferences, then if you're making lots of money, then presumably you must be doing a really great job of meeting those revealed preferences. Therefore, you're doing, by proxy, therefore, a great job at meeting well-being. And of course, you give that money to shareholders, who we'll call owners, who take the most risk because they invest. So these are we'll all recognize these assumptions, even if we haven't expressed them specifically. And then, of course, on the other side, the market is the best place that I should go to for achieving my well-being and meeting my needs. And that because the system is set up to do that optimally, I can trust that what's in that marketplace is going to be the best possible, widest options for me to choose from. And if all those conditions are met, then the thing that holds back my ability to increase my well-being is money. Because it's money that buys me my well-being on the marketplace, increasingly so as we've had the marketization of life. Now, if that's the case, then what I need to be holding government to account for is money in my pocket. Now, that comes from a few sources, but stripped down: jobs. So companies, if they create jobs and profits, are therefore good. And if they don't, then they're not good. And if individuals add to that, they're good and they count. And if they don't, and they're not increasing GDP, then they don't count because they don't put money in my pocket to buy my well-being. And so we have this hyper-financialized system where finance has become the ultimate proxy for what we all care about and what the economy is designed to do. So that is logic one. And we are hook, line, and sinker, not just in it, not just in it functionally, layers of governance, but also layers of cultural assumptions that are so deeply held that we don't even have the ability to excavate them and talk about them. So that's one thing we're going to have to deal with if anyone wants to talk about sustainability and they cannot talk about that system, then I think, let's do that first, because we're not going to be going anywhere. The second logic, now, what happens in logic one? And this is where we have to bring in the concept of governance. Maybe before I do that, I'll just briefly say logic one, short-term self-interest, financial self-interest normally. Logic two, long-term self-interest. And logic three, other serving interest that is aligned with long-term well-being for all. In other words, a sustainable future. In other words, what we want. In other words, the goal of the economy. So that gives you the top line. I've delved into logic one, but I now need to overlay governance for us to really understand what the well-being economy is. A well-being economy is essentially an economy that is designed to deliver and optimize for the end goal of the economy, which is long-term well-being for all, whilst being governed so that we don't destroy that long-term well-being for all in the process. So that shortcut is what it is. And that's in contrast to what you could call business as usual economy, which is saying that the way that we get to long-term well-being for all is via a focus on financial self-interest, be that you as an individual, citizen, consumer, be that you as a government focusing on GDP, or be you as an organization focusing on your financial best interest or survival. And it's not just business that's in that. We all have this fundamental sense that the more money we have, the more well-being we have. And that leads to the current system. So the well-being economy breaks that by saying, why have we got these really weird and not very helpful and actually quite toxic assumptions? And we are inefficiently, driving goal X, which is a symbolic good of driving up money and financial income in order to create another goal. But we don't even know if that money is making that actual goal, long-term well-being for all, better, worse, or whatever. So really what we're doing is creating an efficient, effective economy rather than an economy that is not just inefficient and ineffective, but frankly, achieving the very opposite of the goal that we assume that it does and that it purports to. So the second thing we really, really need to understand. So the first important thing is understanding the goal of the economy is sustainability, and that the current economy is doing the opposite. And then that we want a market economy, and therefore we need to design the market economy to deliver what we actually want. And that is what a well-being economy is. But there's an extra thing that is really needs to be understood for people to get this, is governance. And not only do we cannot move forward even talking about sustainability without understanding why the current economy is the source of the problem. We cannot move forward unless we understand governance. So we need mass governance literacy. And governance is essentially three key things. I led the process. I had the privilege of co-leading the process to create ISO 37000, the first international consensus view on what is governance of organization. Any organization, any part of the world. Stripped down, it's three key things. Governance is about direction, overseeing that direction, and being accountable for that to significant others. So both oversight and accountability rest on direction, governance direction, because that's what you're overseeing and accounting for. So what is direction? It gets to the very heart of decision making. Direction is, what am I optimizing for within what parameters? And why that matters is because if we are not clear about that, we can't create strategy, because strategy is merely how do I achieve an optimizing goal within parameters. And yet we all talk about strategy like it's the pinnacle thing, and it isn't. So once we understand that the goals and the parameters set the basis for strategy, and therefore the investment case, the business model, the vision, the mission, like everything else and all the decisions should, if you've got a well-governed organization, fit within that. And what we have done with our current business as usual, let's call it logic one, short-term self-interest economy, is we have essentially set an objective that is financial income. That is the goal. Maximize financial income. All of your innovation and all of your attention and efforts are about doing that. But the most important resource that we assume is there to service that optimizing goal of profit maximization is stocks and flows of financial capital. Because that's what we ask organizations to disclose, to count, to be accountable for, to audit. And they're not the same thing. And a lot of people do not get that. Their profits are important. I'm like, what, as an innovative optimizing goal or as a means to an end? Because it matters entirely what you're talking about and their different skills. So once you lock logic one into essentially a decision-making box, that's what logic one is, a decision-making box based on a set of assumptions that says, if it optimizes for profit maximization and you can do it while ensuring the stocks and flows of financial capital, great, go ahead. We have a business case for that, go. If it doesn't, it's outside of the business case. Why would we do it? It's irrational. You take that system, you supercharge it, you expand it, you end up in an unsustainable world, because long-term well-being for all is not the innovation goal, even though business, enterprises, and organizations of all kinds are society's innovation engine room. We have said, no, you're not there to innovate for our long-term well-being, innovate for your own financial self-interest. So of course, that's what we get. But underneath the stocks and flows of financial capital sit the stocks and flows of non-financial capital, social and environmental systems and stakeholders. But we're not counting the health of those. We're not building them, therefore, into our business cases and our business models. So, unsustainable world, natural consequence of what we live with. The problem is when those issues hit that governance box, how can you respond as an organization rationally? Only if there is a investment case, a business case that protects your short-term financial self-interest. If there isn't, why would you do it? So, of course, however, people are feeling the pain of these issues hitting. So we end up in what we could call logic two, long-term self-interest. Because we go, oh, hang a minute, or including also the financial crashes, something's going on here. We can't just keep placating stakeholders with these short-term business cases. We have to think, are they trying to tell us something? Have we got the basis for long-term financial self-interest? And that's been the narrative. That's the problem. The problem is long-termism. And that is not an assumption of business as usual economic thinking. So it's an easy one for us to grab, right? And you end up essentially in ESG. Because ESG, the end game of ESG, is essentially saying, bring the parameters for decision-making that will assure the health, the threshold health of all these systems we rely on, stocks and flows of non-financial capitals, health of stakeholders, hence stakeholderism, and social and environmental systems like net zero and biodiversity gain, and get them into your decision-making parameters. And society, if it could say, via lawmakers, is, even though it started off as an investor concept, ESG, are saying, you cannot exist. We will not give you the right to exist, ultimately, unless you can at least prove to us you are not asset stripping society, because that's essentially what's going on. And so that's the very slow and painful thing we're going on. But because no one can say it clearly, and because ultimately everyone still is in short-term self-interest, that is just not landing. And people are being told they ought to care about these things, but there's no logical basis to do it. So that then brings us to logic 3, which, if we imagine, yes, you have your parameters covering all the basis that you rely on, your non-financial capital stakeholders and systems, but you change the reason you exist, your optimizing innovation goal, to be anchored to long-term well-being for all. So you don't exist to optimize financial income or your self-interest. You exist to optimize the goal of the economy, the definition of sustainability, long-term well-being for all. You have to have a good, healthy stocks and flows of financial capital in order to do that. So, of course, profitability is important. It's important for any organization, charity, government, anyone, household. But you also need to make sure everything else is okay. So the language of the well-being, so at the macro level, this is the language of the well-being economy. Because what we're seeing is this intuitive understanding that something is really wrong with logic 1 and really trying to move forward is happening intuitively. What I'm trying to do through the work that I've been doing and that is embedded in these ISO standards is revealing much more clearly what these things are. So at a macro level, moving from a GDP-focused economy where we count finance as the proxy for well-being to actually counting well-being, having well-being accounting and knowing what outcomes we are achieving or not. That is the well-being economy. At the organizational level, we're moving from profit maximizing or financial or self-interested organizations to purpose-driven organizations. They operationalize the well-being economy. The well-being economy is just an idea, a concept, a way of designing something. It needs to be operationalized. And that, of course, starts with purpose-driven government. Governments are organizations. They are governed. They need to be governed very precisely as being purpose-driven. And if we have those organizations, not only do we achieve the well-being economy, but we enable meaningful, purposeful work and lives. And that's where the purpose-driven energy in us as humans to exist, to actually serve the good of others. That's our fundamental driver because it makes us feel like our life is worthwhile. And that's ultimately all we really want. And what keeps us from suicide is the idea that actually our lives matter to somebody. And so we have the assumptions of business as usual keeps that out of the room. Purpose-driven organizations bring that into the room. And really, that's it. And the last thing to say, really, before I hand back over for your further questions is that these are not just concepts. There's stuff going on in each of these levels. And maybe I'll pause there because I think that's what you might be asking next.
All right. Well, thanks, Victoria. Thank you for walking us through, I think, a complex set of topics, but they are critically important for people to understand why we invited you here and why the concept you're bringing forward is critically important. As I heard you speak about where we're going, I remembered that saying from the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, who says, if you don't change direction, you may end up where you're heading. And that's basically what's going on right now. It's basically we'll probably are taking logic number 1 to its natural conclusion, which is not a place where we want to be. So let me just ask you this. I mean, you touched on governance, for example, but I want to ask you, how could we get out of this current logic 1 or mindset or this kind of financially driven economy toward a well-being economy? Are you seeing any place around the world or either smaller scale or bigger scale moving in the direction you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm now shamelessly plugging the book that's going to come out in October that summarizes all of this because it has a lot of that detail all brought together. So at the well-being economy level, for example, and in Canada, it's known as often the purpose economy, and there's an amazing group really driving that forward at a very significant level, especially lots of advice for investors, financial entities, called the Canadian Purpose Economy Project. But broader and perhaps the most well-known is this well-being economy concept, because we have a thing called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and related to that, the Wellbeing Economy Governments, of which Canada has also been somewhat part of and supportive of. And it doesn't really matter in a way what you call it. The point is that there are, in the Wellbeing Economy Governments, it's Wales, Scotland, Iceland, Finland, New Zealand. I probably missed somebody out there. But the point is, this has been taken up and run with. If we also look at the EU Commission, the Stiglitz report, the Sarkozy Commission, where Stiglitz did a lot of work on how do we move from GDP. I mean, even Kuznets, who came up with GDP, said we shouldn't be working on using GDP as a proxy measure. This is actually, and Bobby Kennedy, his whole speech was about, God, what the hell are we doing with GDP? This is not new. It's been going on for a long time. We're now seeing critical mass. At the purpose level, what we have, and let's face it, really that is the operationalizing level. Because until we change how we routinely make decisions, and that means until we change governance, we're not going anywhere. What we have are, of course, decades, and certainly in the last 2 decades, mass adoption of the concept of purpose. Now, we have to say that with a caveat, because people have been scrambling. They kind of intuitively know, again, like I said, intuitively, we think it's not this, we think it's this. But then what happens is when a concept like purpose has so much value because you unleash passion and energy, then of course, logic one is going to say, oh, we want a piece of that. Look, this will be good for our short-term financial self-interest. And so, of course, it gets co-opted, blurs. But what's happening now is really a leap there. So we have an international standard in purpose-driven organizations under development at the moment. That's up to 172 countries coming together, leaning on the international standard in governance to say basically the ultimate question, which is how do we govern and how would we know that an organization is being governed so that it innovates its optimal contribution to long-term well-being for all, while not destroying it in the process. And that's the biggest possible governance frame. And if you get that right in organizations of all shapes, sizes, then you can clear out a lot of the bureaucracy, a lot of the rules. Because let's face it, I mean, ESG is a really good example. We are just plugging the efficiency and effectiveness and creativity with law after law after law, which is like putting our fingers in the holes of a boat that is sinking because it is killing us. We can redesign that and set the market free, set organizations free, set creativity free. But we are not going to do it if we stick on the route that we're on. So that is underway. Everyone can be part of that. And it builds on a national standard in purpose-driven organizations, PAS 808, that anyone can freely download and look up. And then, of course, we know in the coaching world, in the HR world, how long have we been talking about how we should treat people better? We need psychological safety. We need to find our own individual purpose. What we need, and this is what we're on the cusp of, is shared clarity about the problem, logic one, about the current best solution, logic two, and why it's not enough, and why logic three is the only rational, logical way, which means we design the economy to do what it's supposed to do. Otherwise, bye-bye economy, market economy, hello command and control. Just think what happened in the pandemic. And as these crises hit, how easy would it be to move to command and control? Very.
Well, that begs the question a little bit of, is the well-being economy compatible with all existing industries? What happens to industries that don't align with the concept? And if we move to a well-being economy, what does that look like for those companies, for those industries?
Exactly. I mean, and obviously there's always a period of transition, but but that has to be against the science of where we are. Ultimately, all we're saying is that this is the question we need to ask. Should we have this industry? Should we have this company? Is it worth, in the transition period or even overall, maybe we can have enough companies that allow certain really well-being destroying companies to exist in some form for a period of time. But we need to decide that. The point is, we cannot make those decisions because we cannot evaluate choice of strategy until we're really clear what the goal and the parameters are. And the goal and the parameters are long-term well-being for all. And until that is the governance frame for that decision, Matt, we don't have the ability to even ask, certainly not answer that question. And so that is the most important thing, that we get our decision-making asking the right questions. And I see so many leaders almost there. But just imagine, so really, I suppose now to your fundamental point, how do we make this change? I don't think we need to do more than take all the positive energy that we know exists worldwide, where people are feeling this tension and it's affecting them deeply and they want it to be different, and give them the handbook to say, look, and I'm not just saying this is the book we're writing, it's just one little mechanism to try to support this, but to say, hey, there is a way. And if it isn't this, and that's really the provocation, if it's not this, what is it? Yeah. Because we have to stop going around in circling conversations, and we have to say, look, if it's not governance that is aligned with long-term well-being for all, what is it? And if it is that, let's get on with it. And I think if we could just take a critical mass of the existing energy in leaders around the world to that table and get them to be able to either say yes, and I'm in, or say no, because I've got a better idea, I think everything would change. And I think we're poised for that change.
No, I think you're right. I think the inertia that we're seeing now it's a very powerful force, but there's so much moving against that, and so many people realizing, the problems we have and the current system isn't going to solve those.
Thank you. And maybe I would just make, because I know a lot of your audience are from North America, and I know you're going through a particularly really difficult time on this. I think we have to see, firstly, that what is happening is a kind of, this is firstly, what unites all of us is understanding that the establishment, the existing system is killing us. We need to recognize that, because that is our unified position. And our unified position is, we care about long-term well-being for all. That is under threat. So if we can bring our conversations to that uniting place, firstly, fantastic. Then we're also able to see when solutions are not solutions to that, where they are divisions, where they are power grabbing, and where we are essentially leaning in also maybe just intuitively to the only thing we really know, which is logic one. If we think not one world leader, no matter how old, existed in a world where logic one was not dominant. That's a scary reality. And I think if we recognize that, we are all humble and open about that, then we have the chance to move forward. So this really is what it's about. Recognize the problem and recognize the solution. We have to do both. If we don't recognize the problem, we are banging our heads against brick walls in fog that's getting more and more foggy as we try and deal with things within the box that cause the problem. And so it goes. So I genuinely, after 30 years of this, in every possible decision I've made to try to understand this, I now can say this definitively. If I really do think it's that, and if it isn't, please tell me.
Well, thanks, Victoria. Thanks for joining us today. If anyone's interested in reaching out to us or Victoria, you know where to find us. You can find us on social media. LinkedIn's probably the best place. You can go to Victoria's website. Just Google her. It's her name. If you're interested in ED4S, you can find us at ed4s.org. Take care, everybody.